So, for my 15th volume of my funk genre profile here on YouTube, there was so much music in the jazz, funk, soul spectrum that I had to separate it into two parts. Again, this focuses on the 70s, and this particular volume is going to focus on the years 1971 through approximately early 1977. We can round that off to 76. There's going to be some artists that appeared in the last video and some artists that will appear in both volumes. But the first is Donald Byrd, Ethiopian Nights, on Blue Note. This is an album I've been looking for a long time. I think I've already showed you the 70s Blue Note label. Bill Quinn, instructor from the Department of Jazz Studies at Howard University, where Donald Byrd went and helped put together the Blackbirds under his leadership. So the back testimonial on this album. So this is Ethiopian Nights from 1971. Great early jazz funk fusion. This is an album that I strongly debated putting into my volume about records that I bought recently. This is a Record Store Day edition. I actually got this at a discount using the point system the store had. And this album is the JB's, Pass the Peas. It's a reprint of their first album on 180 gram vinyl from the People label. I'm actually going to open this up. I didn't really want to, but it's kind of hard to close up. But I haven't shown you the People vinyl label yet. There it is, the Purple People label. This album is fantastic. James Brown style funk. And it comes with a lot, including this poster. It's a large square poster of the album cover. I'm going to try to get it all in here so you can see it. There. Little goodie put in there. And it comes with this 45, which I don't really feel I need to take out. This is The Grunt, Part 1 and 2. Here's Part 1. And we're going to put that away in this container to preserve it. I don't always keep all of my vinyl in plastic containers because I find it's a little bit intrusive sometimes in terms of storage. Sometimes they rumple up. But I'm sure the VC will give me advice on what to do with that at a later time. This is another album that I found. I don't know if it's a grail per se, but it's a grail to me. This is Manu Dibango, the Soul Makusa album. This album actually has a very different name in its native Africa. This is on the Atlantic label from 1972. A lot of people who grew up in the 70s knew about Soul Makusa. My mother, who was going to an all-black high school during this time, she described there'd be a lot of lunchroom-type jams to this song. She's not really that into musical memories, but that's one I just love that she describes. There's also a situation where there was some confusion and a lawsuit over whether Michael Jackson copied that or not, but I'm not going to get into that in his song Wanna Be Startin' Something. That's part of history, but just having Soul Makusa on vinyl, I just love it. I love that photography on the cover of Manu playing the soprano sax. Bobby Womack, Across 110th Street. The music was conducted by J.J. Johnson. I just love Bobby Womack. I've shown you the United record label before. A lot of people have said that I think it's the title track is the only one that they really go for on this album. It stars Anthony Quinn and Yapa Koto. Really happy finding a first edition of this soundtrack as well. The Ramsey Lewis Trio, Umpendo ni Pamoja, I'm sorry. Upendo ni Pamoja. This is a great, Ramsey Lewis Trio during this period, and this is the reuniting of the original Ramsey Lewis Trio too, not with Maurice White. The Ramsey Lewis Trio at this point, this is also from 1972, they were really hardcore into a funky sound. Ramsey Lewis had a record out about, I think, a couple years after this called Funky Serenity. And this is not very dissimilar. It's also similar in sound to their album Another Voyage from 1969. It's kind of a cross between that. When the Ramsey Lewis Trio were going from their soul jazz, proto-funk sound to straight-up jazz funk. I love this album and very happy I found it. Al Wilson, Show and Tell. This is from 1973. It's on a label called Rocky Road Records. So we'll show that to you. It's not much of a label, but still it's a label I haven't shown you yet. Eddie Harris, Is It In? I already have this on CD, but it's part of one of those 2-on-1 albums where they shaved off one of the cuts to make room for the other album. This is from 1973, so now I have that other cut. I think House Party Rules is the cut they cut off because, it was the longest one. And they usually do that. Eddie Harris is one of my favorite all-time artists. He's an inventor. He's a great jazz funk innovator. And he had such great concepts. I love Eddie Harris. So glad to find a copy of that on vinyl. The 3 Degrees. Philly now. When Will I See You Again was the big hit off this album, and I love it. But it's a great album. Very sweet voices, very strong music from Gamble and Huff. And there is a gatefold in here. And there are the ladies. 3 Degrees, looking really elegant. And that's just what you get on this album. Elegance. There's the old 70's PIR label. You're going to be seeing a lot of them together or apart in these videos to come. The Crusaders, Scratch. Recorded live at the Roxy, 1974. There's the Crusaders on the back. Six Hooper. Right there. Only guy left. R.I.P. Joe Sample. Well, Larry Carlton, too. R.I.P. Joe Sample, R.I.P. Wayne Henderson, and R.I.P. Wilton Felder. That has the Chiza label. I don't know if I've shown you any of that. There's the Chiza label. This used to belong to somebody named Janet Horsey. And here we have an album that I got by Curtis Mayfield, another guy who I love as a musician. Got to Find a Way, 1974. This is on the Curtom label. Wonderful album. Fantastic funk. Fantastic ballads. I mean, it's Curtis Mayfield. What more can you ask for? There's the Curtom label. That's an album from 1974. Next up, we have another album by... Actually, before I show you the next album, I just realized there's something in this Curtis Mayfield record that I haven't shown you yet. This came with a lyric sheet. I kind of consider it one of my little final goodies. Anyway, here we are. Back to where we were. 1974 again. Aierto Moriera, Virgin Land. This is an album that, as you can see on the back, is produced by the great drummer Billy Cobham. There's Aierto with some of his Brazilian percussion instruments. He looks almost like a wizard there. And here's the label that it's on. Salvation. I know I never showed anything on that record label before because I don't have anything on that record label. I think it's a CTI imprint. Here's another artist that was on CTI at one time, but not at this point. Ymir Deodato, Artistry. Live album from the Mississippi River Festival, also 1974. Diodato was just killing at this point. I mean, everything he did just turned to musical gold in the jazz funk fusion world. Willie Hutch, the Mac. He's famous for that soundtrack, but I got this at a place called Dr. Records. And this is an album of his on Motown from 1975. There's Willie on guitar. This album, I know a lot of people will not think about it as being a funk album per se, but there's a lot of clavinets and arp and string ensemble, and the way Gary sings, and the way he puts together songs. This is a funk soul album. Dreamweaver, Love is Alive. I mean, there's so much funky music on this record. Just on the old Warner Brothers label. So I consider this a flat out funk album. Great hit soft rock album too. Like my friend and I, Henrique, always say, you can find funk in any aisle of the record store, and this is a perfect example. The Dreamweaver. The next album up next is Herbie Mann. I got a lot of Herbie Mann in my collection. Discotheque. He does a version of Stevie Wonder's Bird of Beauty, a song that not a lot of people cover. He covers a lot of funk hits from 1974 and 5 on this album. On his flute, Herbie Mann was great at doing that. Cissy Houston also sings backup, just after she was working with the Sweet Inspirations that's on the Atlantic label. Gloria Gaynor, Never Can Say Goodbye, 1975. This is considered one of the first disco albums ever recorded. There's Gloria. There's the MGM label. I don't know if I've shown any of you that. And look who we got here. We got Diodato back again. First Cuckoo. This is an album that my boyfriend Scott had in his collection, and I was lucky enough to find it on one of our vinyl stakeouts. I've been looking for this on any format for years, and it's starting to become available again. It's on MCA Records. Great jazz funk record. They even get a song on this album called, well, he even has a song on this album called Funk Yourself. Ramsey Lewis, Solongo. This album was something I had on CD on the Wounded Bird label, and I lost it, and it's out of print, and I can't get it back on CD, and I can't find my original copy. But I found it on vinyl from the local record haunt, Dr. Records. He had it on display, but I feel I ended up kind of begging him for it, but he sold it to me. From the Columbia label. There's his band at the time. It has Brasilica and Afro Udu, songs I love from that album, from this album. Strong Brazilian funk here. Jimmy McGriff, Tail Gunner. I found out about this man courtesy of Nigel Hall, great keyboard player. There's Jimmy. Let me show you the label on this album because it's not a label I've shown you before. It's a division of TK Productions, I believe. They had a lot of divisions of the TK label in Florida. Connection between jazz funk and the Miami sound. Mother's Finest. You saw their album Mother Factor in the last one. This is their debut on Epic. They had a couple albums before this. Fine funk rock. Eddie Harris. That Is Why You Are Overweight. I love this cover. I love this album. I love the funk that is all over this. It is funky as it looks. And there's all the people playing with him. Great band he had at this point. Terrific jazz funk album on the Atlantic label. John Handy. Hard Work. ABC Impulse, 1976. When I saw Chuck Rainey's name on there, you know, Eddie Bongo Brown, I just had to pick this up. I knew there'd be some great funk kind of stuff on this. John Lee and Jerry Brown, Still Can't Say Enough. again from 1976. As you can see, this album is actually in a plastic case. Hope it doesn't reflect too much. Again, Don at Dr. Records up here recommended this album to me. I think there's a label I want to show you for this album. Yeah, it's just your average 70s Blue Note. It's no big deal. Brand X, Unorthodox Behavior. Great progressive funk fusion. 1976. This is one of the early projects of Phil Collins. I don't know if you can see this Phil up in the corner. There's some personnel information. And there's the Passport record label, which I don't think you've seen yet. And here we have Cerrone, I think that's how it's pronounced, the Supernature guy, but this is not Supernature. This is, I believe, his first album, Love in C Minor. I love that cover. It's so 70s funk. This is an early proto-disco album. He's got some ladies on there looking like they're ready to go above him. There's the Cotillion label. I think I've showed you that before. But, at any rate, what you're seeing now is the very first volume of Part 15 of my Jazz, Funk, Soul vinyl collection. And Part 15B, I guess we should call it, is coming up next. Enjoy your music and stay tuned for Part 2. Peace.